discuss this now with Professor Susan Booysen, Director of Research at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Prof, good evening to you. So, Ace Magashule says, and I quote, "I can only be defended by the structures of the ANC. If they say I have done anything wrong, I will say, well, it's fine. The judges must be the structures of the movement." Is he right?
Well, it is pretty ambiguous. In the first place, between conferences, the NEC or the ANC is the highest decision-making body. And I believe that NEC, just over a year ago, quite an emphatic decision. In fact, where it showed that the ANC might still be divided. Of course it is divided, there are divisions. But very importantly, that Cyril Ramaphosa and those around him in serious, powerful decision-making bodies have a serious upper hand in the NEC. So he is definitely fighting back and using every strategy there is on the book. But it is really for the NEC to take that kind of decision. For example, how would the branches determine his fate? And that would be, in all likelihood, as he hints, through a special conference of the ANC. And it is the NEC only that can, in terms of the ANC's constitution, that can convene a special conference like that.
Also at the same event, Ace Magashule spoke about radical economic transformation being part and parcel of ANC policy documents, which, as far as I can recall, it is, which contrasts interestingly with what the President has said, that no member of the ANC must be part of an RET faction. Just explain what the ANC says in its policy documents, what the President meant, what Ace Magashule might have been referring to.
Yes, you know, it has always been stated emphatically that the ANC is radical and its economic policies are radical. And one can see the evidence, even if following through on action is not always as definitive, but it is quite definitive. And the policies can go, many of them can go as radical. But radical economic transformation as a catchphrase has only started catching on recently, and that is associated with this camp. And I don't know whether I'm splitting semantics here, emphasizing semantics too much, but I do believe there could be a difference could be seen between radical economic transformation as a policy type of policy content and RET, the faction. And in all of the statements from Ramaphosa that I've heard, the reference has been to radical economic transformation faction. And one should always remember to add that so-called before that, because it is a self-proclaimed enclave within the ANC that has attached this label, and I believe all evidence shows that it is in order to legitimize themselves, to try to attach themselves to a grassroots level sentiment for more radicalism, for more far-reaching policies in the ANC that exists. And by attaching themselves, they try to make themselves untouchable, because now they can perceive that politics are threat that we've seen. They threaten to get the branches mobilized. They threaten to get the Free State branches mobilized. And there was a threat to mobilize eNCA. eNCA has kind of taken themselves out of the equation, at least by one of their statements. And the threat that they can be an uprising, or there was a threat that the NEC people supporters of Magashule can resign en masse, not that they would have a majority in the NEC, which NEC, even if they would resign, the NEC would still have the quorum, which is 50% plus one. So I see that in that league of threats, making themselves untouchable, trying to take themselves into a position where the Ramaphosa people in the ANC would think twice to argue with them or to discipline them.
All right, so Ace Magashule was not the only a commentator on the issues, or certainly alluding to them. President Ramaphosa also made an address for the anniversary of Charlotte Maxeke. Let's just listen to what he had to say about discipline.
Umama Charlotte Maxeke was never indisciplined. When the organization says this is the decision, she was not one to say, I am going to do a different thing altogether. That is how disciplined she was. And that is precisely what is needed now. And she believed that leaders must focus on serving the people rather than serving themselves. Leaders must be people who can think about their actions and the good and the damage their actions can do to the interests of the people and their organizations.
Prof, do you think that's a bit of a shot across the bows on the part of the President against those who might be going, well, I'm deciding if I'll step aside despite the NEC decision?
Yes, indeed. I think that was not quite veiled reference to the Secretary General of the ANC, because we hear also in your earlier clip, here's Maxeke saying he will decide whether to adhere, whether to comply with the NEC regulation. He will have an audience with the President to decide, in suggesting that everything will depend on his on the counsel he receives from ANC elders, former presidents. So Maxeke is very clearly saying that he is the final word is out. Also, when he says the branches must decide, he is not accepting the word of the NEC. And so I think he is positioning himself to really be taken to a disciplinary committee, and he then get his own Stalingrad strategy rolling further, in which he would then probably appeal and take it to court in terms of some aspect of administrative law, probably. So, but he is clearly saying that he is not accepting that decision, although not in as many words, but in every other way except in those exact words.
Well, thank you so much for chatting to us. Professor Susan Booysen, Research Director at the Mapungubwe Institute of Strategic Reflections.